I've drawn this picture of what I plan to do with my t-shirt. I've got my basic t-shirt pattern that we made the first time, and this is the front. And what I'm going to do to add fullness is I'm going to use the outline of my t-shirt, and then I'm going to make it a little fancier. You don't have to go this crazy, but I'm going to put an overlay on the top where I've got tucks that are connected into a circular space piece, and then there will be an underfront that's a little shorter in an alternate color, and then the top layer we just talked about. So that'll be 2 layers of front plus a holding piece, and then the back that connects with the outer layer of the front, and the underfront will only be on the front and not on the back. And then I'm not going to change my sleeve. I'm just going to leave the sleeve the way that I have it. I could lengthen it or something. Okay, so that might get in my way. It's attached to my front. So I've got my front and my back. And if there are any changes I want to make between my front and my back, if they didn't fit quite the way I wanted them to, now would be a good time to make adjustments like that. And because of my posture, I'm going to cut a little bit out of my center back neck because I end up wanting to pinch some out, and that's my grid isn't showing. Okay, so I'm going to measure up a 1/2 inch and draw a new line. So create a 2-point line, right click in the water, distance from point, select a point to measure the distance from, +0.5. Okay, and then just normal, and I'll connect it right here. So I'm going to change my piece to be narrower in back just because my posture is really flat right there. So you do what you need to change your t-shirt so that it fits the way you want it to before you start this next one. Modify line swap. And now it's not on grain, so I'm just going to use this center front line that I know is already correct, and modify set rotate, choose 2 points on the target line, choose 2 points on the line I want to move, say cancel, and then OK. And then I'm going to delete this line and change, well, I'll realign, make sure it's the grain that I'm realigning, and then touch the grain line, say OK, and then delete that original line. Okay, so now it's going to look weird together. It's going to look like I made a mistake on the side seam, but I didn't. What I really did was twist the back. So because I know that, I'm going to leave it that way. And maybe it would be a good idea for me to label it and change the name of it to smaller back. So I'm going to do File Save As. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say piece to menu, and then just for fun I want to see if my original changed too. What did I do? So my original didn't change. My original lines up with my front, and my adjusted piece is twisted a little wonky, but my center back is straight. And it's not a change I would make to put in production, but since it's for me, I know that's what I want, so that's what I'm going to do with it. Up here, I used the same shirt a different time, and I lengthened it into a dress. And then I changed that front piece, and I added tucks on the side, so when it sews back into the side seam, and I don't see a back piece here, so I would need to make one, then the tucks would just fold in, and then it would hang the correct way, and I'd have 3 tucks happening. So that's another option for your added fullness to a t-shirt assignment. But we're coming back to that, and we've got our picture attached to that, like it or not. Okay, so I'm not planning to change the back at all, other than my change for fit. And I know the pieces fit already. So if I want to make it look like this picture, it might be easier for you if well, maybe I'll do that. I'll trace it off. Okay, so I've turned this piece upward so you can see what I'm doing with it. So I'm going to take the front and make it look like that. And in the picture I drew, the neckline was higher, so I'm not going to change this as much. In fact, I might raise it a little bit. So I'm going to start by making a circle, maybe an oval right there, and then I'll cut the piece up into little pieces. So I want a reference line right here, and it would have been good if I did perpendicular from that line coming up. And this is the shape of the neckline of that underblouse right here. In fact, that's going to be too wide, isn't it? Because I want it to hide over here. So I'm going to undo that. And I'm just going to bring it to about there so it isn't really going to show. It'll just hide right there. Okay, I'm happy with that. So that can be that under piece, and I could just trace that off right now. So create piece trace, but if I do that now, it's going to turn out the wrong direction. So I'm going to trace it off after I rotate it back. So now I'm going to create my overlay, and I could go into circles. And if I wanted to just create, I am in create line circles, and I came down to center point. And if I want to have that circle right at the waist level line, then I'm going to start it here and pull it out until it's the size that I want it to be. And that's just going to be my piece. It isn't a line, it's a piece, and it's got a name over here. So I'm just going to say okay. And then I need to cancel so it doesn't create another one, but I'm going to copy this line onto my piece. So create line copy, this one. Well, was I not watching? I created another piece. So I need to go into Create Line Copy and choose those two lines and say OK. I want it to go to this piece and say OK again, and then I'm going to cancel so that it goes right where it was. Cancel again, and then I'll move that piece out of the way. So I've got my little circle right there. And I need the circle on the piece, but this circle that I need to rename, I want to put my name at the front of it, is also going to be a separate piece that this is going to sew to on both sides. So I can leave it just like that, and we'll come back to that one. I'll put it over here with my back that I need to give a new name to later. So now I'm going to create the neckline and the front overlay look. And I'm going to start with a 2-point curve. And this time I want it to connect exactly to where my back starts. And I'm going to bring it down to the outside edge of that circle. And if I want this to curve a little bit, I can have it curve, or I can have it be straight. But I curved it. And now I'm going to do something else down here. I've got this little point coming down, and I don't need to make it far away, but I am going to make it a little bit longer. So I'm going to connect that to my circle, and that one could be straight. I want to extend this line out a little bit, so I'm just going to add a little 2-point line on top. And I'm going to put it kind of high so that when I pull it out, I can tell when it disappears. And that looks, it's not quite perfect. So I could rotate the line a little if I want to. So modify line, rotate, select, nope, that's piece. Modify line, rotate. Select the line to rotate, choose the point to rotate around, and then I'm just going to pull it out there. Okay, that's better. So I'm also going to come up to modify line adjust, and I'm going to pull this one down just a little bit, because I want my side almost 2 inches long, which means I want to arc that a little bit, which also means that I'm going to need to lengthen my back. So to that point. So I'm going to create a 2-point line again, 2-point curve. And if I was really worried about it, I would measure it, but I like that, but would I like it better if it was closer to an inch? And I do. So I'm going to delete my first line, modify line, delete. Okay. So now I have another piece sitting on top, and I'm going to trace that one off. This is the one that I'm going to make the major changes to. So if you're watching this in advance and you don't want to see all of that other again, look at where the video is right now and start it right there when you come in to use the computer. Create piece trace. I'm starting with my neckline, tracing around, and then around my circle. Say OK and OK again. I did what I said I wasn't going to do, didn't I? Okay, so I've got my grain line going the other way, but that's okay. I'm going to call this overlay. And now I'm going to draw on here. I could draw on here where I want to put my tucks, my lines for tucks. And this is going to work whether I put in tucks or gathers. So if I go to Advanced, when I get into Advanced, I can do Added Fullness, which we've done a little bit of before, and I could do Pleats. Fullness and pleats work very similar to each other. Variable and tapered under fullness are very similar to variable and tapered in pleat. Knife and box are a little bit different. It helps you figure out which side to fold to. So if you want to play with pleats, go ahead, but try adding fullness first and then move up to pleats. So I could have variable or tapered or parallel, but I just want tapered this time. And I need to create a slash line from pivot end to open end, and this is the end that's going to open, so I want to start up here. So I'm going to, before I do that, how many do I want? I'm going to cancel that. Right here I'm going to divide this line up into even spaces. So if you have a place that you're aiming your extra tucks to, then you maybe want to turn that into one line and distribute your points along it. So I'm going to modify that line and combine those two into one line. And how many tucks have I got in my picture? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. Do I want 5 or 6? So I want 5 or 6 tucks. How much space have I got there? Verify line length. Less than 4 inches. So even if I do 6, they'll be more than 1/2 of an inch apart. So I'm okay with that. I think I'm going to stick to 5, but I want my first tuck not to cross over my curve right there. So I'll start the first one further out, and the rest of them will be closer to 1/2 an inch. So I'm going to go up to create point multiple, and I'm going to add points on a line, just like we did for buttonholes. Select a line to receive the points. I don't want any points on either end. This time I'm going to choose mark points, and I want them to go on this line. So I want and then say OK. The number of points between start and end, I want extra on that first one, so I want 6 or 7, but we're going to stick with 6. So I'm going to tell it 6, and that gives me equal spaces, but my first one is going to start further down and the rest won't be even. Okay, so that gives me some nice reference points, and I could make it easier for myself and kind of decide where I want those to go in advance, but I'm just going to go right into adding fullness, advanced, fullness, tapered, create slash line from pivot end to open end. So this is my pivot end, and it's coming to that little mark right there. And my next one is going to come from the armhole. Oh, it's only going to let me do one. So I'm going to say OK, and the location that's going to remain stationary, I think, is this side right here. And the internal line that is moving, there are none. So I'm going to say OK again. And then when I position the piece to spread it, it looks like I've got about an inch there. And do I want a ½ inch on the inside? I think I'm going to do 1 1/4 inches, so it's a little bit bigger than a ½ of an inch. So I'm going to switch to value, and I'm going to say 1.25. Okay, so it's not happy with the grading, but other than that, it's okay. So that yellow space is where it added my tuck. And while it's right there, I want to make sure that before the yellow disappears that I put notches in. I don't necessarily need to do it right now, but if I add a notch right here, and right there where the mark is, then I know that that tuck is going to fold up the way I want it to. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Advanced, Fullness, Tapered, and this time I want it to come from the armhole to that next mark, and this one's going to come from the side. Sometimes, depending on the piece, it'll let you do multiple at once, but that curve probably has something to do with it. So say OK. The location that remains stationary is going to be the side again. No internal lines are moving. And my new distance I'm already set to value, and I'm going to say 1.5 again. And because that was a grading error, I'm just going to move on with it. Well, my fullness that's added stayed there, so I could go ahead and add all of these afterward. So I'm just going to keep going. Slash line from pivot end to open end, going to my new mark. There we go. Oh, there. Oh, it's going to let me do another one. Nope, just two. This time, my stationary location, I'm going to leave the armhole. No internal lines are moving, and I'm going to enter 1.25. And because I'm doing two, I'm going to enter 1.25 again. So I've got two. And my last one is going to come from down here and go to that last mark. And my location to remain stationary is the armhole again, and you can choose. It has more effect on the grain line than anything else. No internal lines are moving, and 1.25. Okay. So that's where my added fullness is, and when I fold those into tucks and sew them down, then I will be sewing them to this round piece, and I'll add seam allowance to both of them, and then I'll have a piece that has added fullness sewn to a control piece. If you added extra flare and that's your fullness, some of you have made an A-line, then this shoulder piece starts to curve, and you want to leave it curved because that's where the fit comes from. And then that's controlled by sewing it into your straight shoulder seam. So if you end up doing that and you're making an A-line, don't fix the curve in the shoulder. So while I'm right here, I'm going to go ahead and add my notches. And it automatically assigns a point there. So as long as you catch it before you make any changes, to the edge, then it's okay to do that. But sometimes after you save it, the color, the lighter color, will disappear. So I like to mark them fairly early. I'm also going to go in and delete my mark points. Modify, delete. And it doesn't have mark on here as an option. Mark is considered a line. So I'm going to, I don't want to delete that. No. Well, okay. Edit point information. So if I choose that point right there, I'm going to deselect where it says point and apply. And anywhere I've got that, I want to change it. So apply. So that again to get to was edit point. The box comes up and you choose the mark point to get rid of it. So I'm highlighting the corner where it says mark and then deselect that box and apply, and make sure you get rid of all of them. And if you're just going to plot it and sew it and turn it into me, it isn't going to be critical. But if you end up using this in a production setting and you leave your marks on there, it can really upset the cutting system. So you want to make sure you take them out. Okay. So there's my piece. I can either, if I wanted to smooth it out, I could smooth it out and then gather it. This looks a little funny to me. And I think that has to do with, do you see how smooth this is and how this isn't? That's probably okay. So on this piece, I want to do the same thing I did to the inside. So I'm going to modify line combine. I want to combine these two lines. I can't do them both because the line, well, I'll make the mistake and let you watch, but it has to be a 3-point piece. So I have to do it half at a time. If I try to combine these two lines into one, it will say no. It must have at least 3 perimeter lines. So I'm just going to do half at once. So create point, multiple points on a line again. Choose the line to receive the points. Same as before. Number of points is 6. And say OK. So now I can split the line in another spot. I want, well, that wasn't very smart. I'm going to undo that. Add multiples. Points on a line. But I'm going to change it to notches so I don't have to get rid of the marks. So six. Okay. Then I'm going to delete that notch. Modify, delete notch, because the first one doesn't have a tuck on it. So now I can split the line over here somewhere, modify line split, and then when I combine these two, it'll still be a 3-point piece. Modify, combine those two, and create multiple We're still on notches, so I'll say OK, and 6. And then delete that top notch. But I want notches at the top and the bottom, so now I'm going to add a notch, 2 of them, the top and the bottom. And maybe for convenience, I want to have a line right there so I know. And besides that, I need to change my grain line. So I'm going to draw a 2-point line at the beginning and the end, and then I'll just reorient the piece to that. Okay. So that tucks to there, and that tucks to there. And I'm curious about something. Until you know you can trust the computer to do exactly what you want it to do, it's a good idea to invent ways to double check your work. So what I just did right there was find a way to recreate that piece and make sure that it's going to line up pretty. And you don't have to do this. This is just so that you see the thought process. So I'm going to create piece trace, these 2 pieces. And I'm going to give it a throwaway name because I don't want to keep it. Okay, so now I'm going to line it up and that looks like it would line up okay with that piece, but I want to see the connection between those two and that I like it. So I'm going to do modify, set, rotate, and I'm just going to start at that end and do the same thing with the piece next to it and make sure I'm happy with that curve, and it's just like it was. And if I did that with the rest of them, they would do the same thing. So that would be how you would double check. Now this piece, the grain, I'm going to just choose where I want the grain to be. I could rotate it back. Maybe I'll start with that. I'll rotate both of those back the way they belong. So modify, piece, rotate, 90 degrees counterclockwise. Say OK. And Okay. So this piece I can trace off now. This one I can get out of the way. That's what it's supposed to look like. I've got my pieces. The rest of them are on their side, and that's how they overlap. And I'm pretty happy with how that grain line is going to look. But I think it's going to fit in the marker better if I rotate it so that the curves are more parallel with the other pieces. So I'm going to rotate the piece. I'm going to choose the piece to rotate, and I'm going to rotate. And see how I am. Undo. Modify piece rotate. Read the instructions. Clockwise, none. Select the piece to rotate. Say OK. Choose a point to rotate around. And my reference point, I'm just going to touch one and pull it down. So I'm looking at, if you look at where the grid lines are, my armpit corner is an inch below my hem corner, and my center is almost lined up. So I'm going to pull it down a little bit more, and that looks to me like it would sit better in a marker when I cut it out. But if I have stripes or something on it, then I might have a whole new feeling about it. But I like where that is. So I'm going to go ahead and realign the grain on both of these pieces. Modify piece, realign, make sure I choose the grain, touch the grain, and the grain is the one that has that little arrow on it right there. So that changed. Okay. So that's the front. Where did my back go? Here's my back. So for the moment, I'm going to, okay, getting ahead of myself. I'm going to trace off that underfront that I was going to trace off later so that I didn't have to change the grain. Create piece trace. This is my neckline. I want the shorter version. I want the on the fold version, and I don't want that line. Okay. And okay again. So that's my underfront. So I'm going to change it. Under front. And say OK. And now I've got my back, and I have to change my back because I lengthened the front. So I'm going to modify, set rotate. I want this line, and I want my back to align to it. And it's going to look a little weird, but not too bad. Well, just the way it did when I changed it. So if I leave the length of my back the same, do I want to leave the back the same and just bring it down here, or do I want to lower it? I want to lower it. So I'm going to copy this line onto that piece. Create line, copy. Choose this design line from the front piece, say OK, and put it on the back piece, say OK. There it is, cancel. I want it in the same place. And I can copy that line while I'm at it. I should have done them both at the same time. Okay. So this is my map piece, and I could rename it as my map piece. Maybe I'll save as map piece. File, save as. Map, and say OK. And piece to menu. And then my original that I probably changed somewhere won't get caught in that. Look at that mess. You're not supposed to do that. Okay, I'm going to realign my piece because it's sitting crooked. So modify, realign. This time I'm going to change to piece, choose the piece, and it's back where it belongs. And I'm going to play with something new. Modify. No. No, I'll keep it simple. I'll be good. No, it will be simple. I'm going to move this point, and I want it .25 in the X direction longer, and I'm going to say OK. And then I'm going to connect those two. And it looks like alright, so I want that to be a right angle, so I'm going to start that over. Instead of, I'm going to do perpendicular on line. I'm going to start in the same place. And pull it out. And then I'm going to make my 2-point curve from here to here. Okay. That is a mess. Modify, delete line. Oh, we can't delete that one. So I'm going to trace it off now. Create piece trace. Well, look at how pretty that is in spite of me. Okay. So I don't need this. I need my recent back, not that one. I want my map. And my overlay and my underlay. And I just turned the seams off and on, on and off again, and I did hide seams because I'll take care of that all at once. Right now I'm lining it up for a model. And I've got all of my grain lines going back sideways so they turn out correctly in a marker. And File, Create, Edit, Model, Add Pieces. My name, added Fullness. I'm calling it indigo because that was the type of shirt I copied. And say OK. And then I'm going to add my map and my back. And the rest of the pieces and say OK. So there they are. I didn't rename Circle 5, so I'm going to leave it alone. So you could have done something simpler, like just change your piece and extend your hem out and do the same thing to both sides and add 3 tucks. But I find if I do more complicated demos, then I get more interesting returns. And if you want to, there's a file, a folder on Pinterest called 1680, so 1680 controlled fullness. And if you type that in, that page should come up and you'll see some examples. Some of them are historical. Okay, so my seam allowance, I will need seam allowance on this because I'm sewing it together. I want a bigger hem on my Yes, I want a bigger hem on my back and my underfront, but I don't want to explain to you how that will work. So I'm going to combine some lines before I add seams. Modify line, combine those 2, those 3, oh, that's already okay, because that's a grade line, grade point apparently. So advanced seam, define all of my pieces. I want 3/8 of an inch mostly, but I don't want it down the center back or the center front. And I'm just going to stick with 3/8 of an inch. 0.375. Say okay, and I'm unhid my seams, and there they are, and I'm going to swap my seam allowances on those so they're ready to plot. So I'm still in advanced seam swap. Choose, 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 but not on my map, and say okay. Yes, okay, and if I don't see anything that's really stressful. Alright, so when I swap my seam allowance, that extra yellow in there disappeared. So don't panic when that happens, it just happens. That's why we have the notches already set up, and if you want to leave those lines there, you can, so you can see what's folding. You could do that all the way around the piece, or you could just leave it alone. I could delete those now, but I'm going to leave them. Okay, so now save the pieces. Make sure they're going to the area that, and that's a grading error. And I should have said yes, I want to continue by saving it. Oh, something happened there. But obviously that notch belongs further over, so that must have been part of the problem. So if I were to split, modify line split, when I have things like that happen, I'm assuming that they will happen to you. So I'm splitting the lines so that I can measure them. And if I go into verify line length and measure, I want to measure my stitching line. Those are 055 and 056. So I really want to put a notch right here at 055 and then get rid of that notch, but we'll see what happens. So if I create a notch, I want to right click in the water and say distance from point, and I'm going to measure -0.0 .556 and say OK. And it didn't go there because, alright, I have to swap the seam allowance back on this one. Modify, advanced seam swap, choose the piece, say OK. So now I can add the notch on the solid line. It didn't work because I tried to add it to a dotted line. Okay, so create notch, right click, distance from point, select a point to measure the distance from, negative 0.556, say OK, and it didn't do it. Why? There it is. Okay, if I undo that, I added a notch on the other side. And apparently something to do with the way I traced the piece off. Oh, no, I just made a mistake. So I need to be positive 0.555. Create notch, because it's going clockwise and oops, I put a second notch in that place. Create notch, right click, distance from point, choose the point, 0.556. There. Okay, so the question is, if I split this right here, modify line, split, right here, and I merge this, modify line, combine, is this space going to be 1.25 inches? Verify line length. And it is. So for some reason, this notch moved over to here when I added seam allowance. So I need to keep an eye on that. That was the mistake, and it's something that you need to double check. But I am going to delete this notch. Modify, delete, notch. Okay, so I'm going to swap my seam allowance back. And if this is something that just plagues you and you try to fix it and you can't fix it, if you're just going to make a sample, go ahead and plot it with the lines solid on the inside instead of the outside, but that won't work for production. So advanced, but it will work for your homework if you leave me a note. Swap. There it is, too large for the curve, and it's mad, so. But the spaces are still the same, so it's going to be okay. So if I had it to do over, I would draw lines back and forth between all of them so it would be easier to see. Okay, so once I save that, then it's all still going to be good to go. Right. Yes. Yes, I want to continue saving the piece. No, it said cancel. Okay. Do you want to cancel saving the piece? No. There we go. Okay, so the piece got saved. There we go. So move it to the P drive into zero share, and go ahead and plot it and make your sample to go along with it of whatever fullness you decide to add.